You are watching A News. I'm Leila Masimova. Here are the top stories for today. Markets bounce back in relief rally after US President Donald Trump announces a 90-day pause on most new tariffs. US President Donald Trump warns military action against Iran still on the table ahead of nuclear talks. US and Russian officials are in talks in Istanbul to ease tensions and restore their diplomatic missions. Markets react as US President Donald Trump hits pause on his sweeping tariffs, except when it comes to China, with a 90-day freeze announced and a 10% baseline tariff remaining. Washington signals a shift in strategy amid growing trade tensions. Our correspondent in Washington, Obi Shabandar, had the latest.
Stay calm and carry on. That was the message from President Trump on Wednesday morning as he sought to address market concerns now that his sweeping historical tariffs have come into full effect. Trump announced that he will issue a 90-day pause on all tariffs while keeping a baseline 10% tariff across the board, with one notable exception: China. The president said that he is singling out China because of its retaliatory tariffs, while other countries are, according to the president, telling the president that they are willing to negotiate a trade deal. Everything is going to work out well, the president wrote on social media. The USA will be bigger and better than ever before, according to the president. President Trump also wrote that now is a great time to buy and for companies to move their operations into the United States in order to avoid having their goods taxed by American tariffs. The U.S. stock market has rebounded a bit as Wall Street assesses the prospects for a trade war after China hit back with an 84% tariff of its own on U.S. goods. The U.S. now has a total tariff of 125% on Chinese imports. White House economic advisors have said that Trump's tariffs have given Washington significant leverage in reaching more equitable agreements with countries that have a high trading volume with the United States. Traders on Wall Street may have been further reassured that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has said that he would be taking a lead negotiating role in tariff talks. Meanwhile, President Trump has said that negotiations with countries that have requested meetings will take place immediately, and that seems to have led to Wall Street stocks surging as a result. Nonetheless, Trump has made it clear that he's more concerned with protecting working-class Americans as opposed to prioritizing Wall Street, the latter of which has been generally in opposition to expansive tariffs. I'm Ube Shabander for A News, Washington, D.C.
Wall Street posted its biggest gains since 2008 after US President Donald Trump announced a 90-day pause on most new tariffs. The move also sparked a rebound across global markets despite rising trade tensions with China.
US financial markets roared back to life after Wall Street's worst four-day stretch since the pandemic. The S&P 500, a key index that tracks the performance of 500 major American companies, jumped nearly 10%, its biggest daily gain since the 2008 financial crisis. The Dow Jones rose by almost 3,000 points, while the tech-navy Nasdaq soared more than 12%. The surge came after US President Donald Trump announced a sudden 90-day pause on most new tariffs, easing fears that his trade policies could trigger a global economic slowdown. While a blanket 10% tax hike on nearly all US imports remains in place, the more aggressive duties on dozens of countries have been paused. However, tensions with China escalated, with Trump imposing a new 125% tariff on Chinese imports, retaliation for Beijing's own 84% tariff on American goods set to begin Thursday.
If nothing changes, 125% tariffs on Chinese exports to the U.S. is immense. We import a massive amount, hundreds of billions of dollars from China, that will have to go somewhere else. I think it's going to rapidly change supply chains for companies who now operate heavily in China. That's already been happening the last few years. You know, the seeds were sown for a lot of movement for companies like Apple and Nike and many others to shift to countries like Vietnam and India and other South Asian countries where production costs are obviously lower than they would be in the US, which is why the reciprocal tariffs were so damaging, is because the scope was so broad. There was really nowhere to hide.
Even with the sharp gains, US markets remain below levels seen before Trump's original tariff announcement on the 2nd of April. But the president's reversal was enough to lift investor sentiment and prompt financial institutions such as Goldman Sachs to roll back recession forecasts. The US Treasury also successfully auctioned $39 billion in 10-year bonds.
We saw a bit of a sell-off in bonds overnight that drove yields up sharply, where we saw the 10-year Treasury yield go up over 4.5. Now, I'm going to say that's important because things like car loans and mortgages are benchmarked off the 10-year Treasury. So that means if that yield is going up substantially, you're going to pay more for cars and mortgages. That's not good, right? The question is, what's going on? The volume of trading. Was this China dumping some of the assets that they hold, or was there something else going on? Well, the good news is we had an auction from the Treasury today at 1 o'clock. There was very strong demand for that same 10-year Treasury bond, which means there's no issue. People still have a lot of faith in the credit worthiness of the United States.
In response, China filed a new complaint with the World Trade Organization, accusing Washington of unilateral bullying and vowing to defend its economic interests under international trade rules. Despite the ongoing tensions, Chinese markets opened higher. The Shanghai Composite rose 1.3%, while Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index gained 3%. Still, concerns lingered as China's yuan weakened to its lowest level since 2007. That rebound in sentiment extended across the Asia-Pacific region. Japan's Nikkei 225 surged 8.6%, Taiwan's TAIEX jumped 9.3%, and South Korea's Kospi climbed 4.8%, all reflecting relief over the temporary pause in tariff escalation.
However, some Americans remain concerned about the future regardless of the pause on tax hikes.
Some Americans are tightening their belts ahead of higher prices when they shop. It's after US President Donald Trump's recent tariff, increases on imports and a sudden pause of the tax hikes on Wednesday. However, some residents are still worried about the future.
Trump is full of himself. He wants to make the rules. 90 days, not going to make a difference to me. I don't even fit in that pay grade.
So I'm the guy that I adjust to every situation. I just went and got an extra job because I know I'm going to need it. You know, if the tariffs go up, I just got to get extra. I got to adjust to whatever's going on in the world. So I'm an adjuster. You know what I'm saying? So I would just get an extra job. I already got it. You know what I'm saying? Because I know the tariffs, and I know that, guess what? We're going to need extra money.
Trump is not the first person to implement tariffs. You know, it's like when they say, like, Obama did more drone strikes than any other president, you know? Nobody got mad. That's what the job requires, so I'm not mad at it.
The 90-day pause on tariffs brings some relief to consumers and investors worried about the global economic impact of US trade policies. However, uncertainty still hangs over everyday Americans.
67%, I think you can, for the most part, see it.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has welcomed US President Donald Trump's announcement to pose reciprocal tariffs. She's calling it a step towards stabilizing the global economy. In a written statement shared on X, von der Leyen said clear and predictable conditions are essential for smooth trade and supply chains. She reiterated her positions that tariffs and taxes that hurt businesses and consumers, once again advocating for a zero-for-zero tariff agreement between the EU and the US. Just days before expected nuclear talks, US President Donald Trump has warned that military action against Iran remain on the table. He added that Israel will be leader of any operation. However, Iran says it is open to negotiations.
US President Donald Trump says he hasn't ruled out military action as an option against Iran. His comment comes just days ahead of anticipated nuclear talks between the two nations on Saturday in Oman. Speaking to reporters at the White House, Trump said Israel would be the leader of any military strike if Tehran refuses to abandon its nuclear weapons ambitions.
But with Iran, if it requires military, we're going to have military. Israel will obviously be very much involved in that. He'll be the leader of that. But nobody leads us. We do what we want to do.
While Trump earlier characterized the talks as direct, Iran has insisted that any engagement will be indirect. The United States is increasingly alarmed by Iran's progress, with officials saying Tehran is closer than ever to developing a viable nuclear weapon. The US Treasury Department has imposed a new round of sanctions targeting Iran's nuclear program. These include 5 entities and 1 individual for their roles in supporting nuclear development. Among those designated are the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran and several affiliated companies. Meanwhile, US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth says he hopes the outcome from the weekend's negotiations will be a peaceful one.
I mean, President Trump's been clear on that. Iran should not have a nuclear bomb, nuclear weapons. We very much hope the president is focused on doing that peacefully. That's very much what we would prefer as well. Our job at the Defense Department is to make sure we have all the assets available for any possible contingency.
Hegseth confirms the deployment of B-2 bombers to the US-British base on the Indian Ocean island of Diego Garcia. Experts say the stealthy B-2s, capable of carrying the heaviest bombs and nuclear weapons, are now in a strategic position for operations in the Middle East. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian reiterated on Wednesday that Iran is not after a nuclear bomb and expressed openness to US investment if a nuclear agreement can be reached.
As Iran and the US prepare for high-stakes nuclear talks in Oman, as weekend Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian strikes a firm tone, rejecting weapons ambitions, but stands by Iran's nuclear progress. Turash Shiralido has more from Tehran.
In the prelude to the upcoming negotiations between Iranian and US diplomats to be held on Saturday in Oman, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian said that Iran is not after military weapon, and also added that Iran will not compromise on its nuclear achievements. Following Mr. Pezeshkian's remarks, which were made on the National Day to commemorate nuclear achievements, a number of foreign politicians have also expressed their views on the current situation on Iran's nuclear negotiations. UN Secretary General spokesman Stefan Dujarric expressed the hope that Iran and US will be able to settle their differences through negotiations, and also said that he is very hopeful that the upcoming negotiations will be fruitful and positive. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova also said that it was the short-sighted Western politicians who created the current situation, the stalemate in Iran's nuclear program negotiations. She also made these remarks after a trilateral meeting of deputy foreign ministers of Iran, Russia, and China in Moscow. And Turkish foreign minister as well, Mr. Hakan Fidan, has expressed the hope that there wouldn't be any military adventurism in the region against Iran, as it will exacerbate the current situation in the Middle East region. This is Turash Shiralido reporting from Tehran for A News TV.
US and Russian officials signed talks in Istanbul to ease tensions and restore the diplomatic missions. It's after recent strains over the war in Ukraine. The discussions are focused on restoring embassy operations after years of disputes, restricted movements and visa delays and frozen diplomatic properties. Russia says sanctions have made it difficult to pay its diplomats, while US envoys report a limited mobility inside the country. However, officials say war in Ukraine is absolutely not on the agenda. Defense ministers from 30 countries are meeting at NATO headquarters in Brussels on Thursday to discuss proposals to create a reassurance force for Ukraine. It's aimed at ensuring a stable post-conflict peace deal. The group is being named as Coalition of the Willing and is led by France and the UK. It comes as global efforts to broker a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine are facing growing challenges. However, the US will not participate in the discussions as following a decision by President Donald Trump's administration to refrain from participating. The United States and Panama have announced new steps to expand military cooperation. During a visit by the US Defense Secretary on Wednesday, both sides addressed growing concerns over security and influence around the Panama Canal.
The United States and Panama say they'll expand US military training in the Central American nation. Panama says the US has recognized sovereignty over the Panama Canal, despite tough rhetoric from Washington. It follows the first visit of a Pentagon chief, US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, to Panama in decades. Hegseth says he sees the canal as key terrain that Panama would secure together with the US and not with China.
We certainly understand that the Panama Canal is in Panama, and protecting Panamanian sovereignty from malign influence is important, which is why when President Trump says we're taking back the Panama Canal from Chinese influence, that involves partnership with the United States and Panama. And we're grateful that they've welcomed U.S. troops on Panamanian soil by invitation through rotational joint exercises, and that's what you'll see in the Memorandum of Understanding, is an opportunity to revive, whether it's the military base, naval air station, locations where U.S. troops can work with Panamanian troops to enhance capabilities.
However, in joint statements about deepening security cooperation, the English language version published by the Pentagon didn't include a sentence that was in the Spanish language version published by Panama that spoke about the country's sovereignty over the canal. Panama's Minister of Public Security, Frank Abrego, made it clear that at no point did the recent Memorandum of Understanding involve giving up sovereignty over the Panama Canal or its adjacent areas. He says that Panama remains under the framework of the canal's neutrality treaty.
Panama has, at no moment in this Memorandum of Understanding, ceded sovereignty over the Panama Canal or any of its adjacent areas. Panama is within the neutrality treaty, and upon this constitutional base, the US has acted with due respect.
He also added that Panama would not allow permanent military bases. This visit marks a renewed phase in US-Panama defense cooperation, with both governments reiterating their positions on sovereignty and security around the Panama Canal.
The European Union has authorized the European Commission to begin negotiations with Kazakhstan on easing visa requirements. The talks will aim to simplify procedures, including faster processing, fewer documents, lower fees, and broader access to multi-entry and long-term visas. Kazakhstan's foreign ministry says the agreement will take effect only after both sides complete necessary domestic procedures. The move is also expected to boost cooperation in trade, culture and humanitarian efforts. Now to discuss the visa facilitation talks between Kazakhstan and the European Union, we're joined by political analyst Dimash Aljanov, speaking to us from Almaty. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
How might a visa facilitation agreement between Kazakhstan and the EU reshape regional mobility and economic integration in Central Asia?
Well, it's a positive sign, but I think we're a bit far from reaching this agreement. So there's a few things on the table. As you may know, previously Mr. O'Sullivan, the special representative of the EU, visited Kazakhstan on the issue of sanctions. So there are any other issues on the table that to be negotiated between the two sides before this visa issue will get some real impulse, and will be negotiated between the Kazakhstan EU and the EU member countries. So by now, as far as I know, it is early stage only. So it might take 1 or 1.5 years. Again, if it's going to be very positive, if it will be very positive, and all sides will agree all other matters. So, but yes, in generally there are more than 100,000 people every year visiting the European Union from Kazakhstan. If the sides will reach agreement, it will be very positive both for economic and the cultural interaction between the Kazakhstan and European states.
And could this agreement signal a broader shift in the EU's strategic engagement with Central Asian nations?
As you may know, Ursula von der Leyen, she mentioned during her speech in the European Parliament that after the tariffs were imposed by the United States, European Union will actively try to explore the new markets. So I think the EU see Central Asia and Kazakhstan as one of these areas. So, and again, we have to be very practical on this. If the EU will be satisfied with the certain measures taken by the Kazakh government, so of course this will be the good impact for the further cooperation. But again, the EU is not the major economic player in Kazakhstan and in Central Asia, but definitely having the China and Russia. On the other hand, more dense cooperation with the European Union will be a very plus in geopolitical terms as well. So Kazakhstan needs the European countries to be represented in our economy to keep its multi-vectoral policy.
Thank you, Mr. Aljanov.
Thank you for having me.
The Azerbaijan Defense Ministry says that its military positions were subjected to fire from Tovuz-Galai direction last night. According to the ministry, at about 11:50 p.m. on the 9th of April, Armenian forces opened fire from positions stationed in the direction of Mususkan settlement of Tovuz-Galai region. Azerbaijan officials say its troops responded with what they say were adequate retaliatory measures to neutralize the threat. No casualties have been reported so far, and the situation is said to be under control. Azerbaijan Ministry of Foreign Affairs has extended its condolences to the Dominican Republic. It's after a roof collapse at a nightclub in Santo Domingo on Tuesday night. At least 184 people were killed and there were more than 100 injured. In a statement shared on social media, Baku authorities expressed sympathy to the government and the people and wished a swift recovery to those injured. Emergency crews say they will continue to work until the lost body is found. The incident prompted international messages of support. The UN has urged the Trump administration to reconsider its recent cuts to humanitarian aid, warning that such reductions could amount to a death sentence for millions of people in desperate need. Afghanistan, which is already grappling with a severe humanitarian crisis, is expected to be among the hardest hit by these cuts. Tamim Bahiz brings more from Kabul.
The Trump administration has cut funding to the World Food Programme's emergency operations, which support millions of people in impoverished countries around the world, including Afghanistan. In a social media post, the WFP, the world's largest provider of food aid, urged the United States to reverse the decision, warning that cuts could amount to a death sentence for millions facing extreme hunger and starvation. Afghanistan is currently grappling with a severe humanitarian crisis. According to the United Nations, nearly 23 million people in the country will require humanitarian assistance this year. WFP Acting Country Director Mutinta Chimuka has stressed that Afghanistan is currently experiencing the worst child malnutrition crisis in its history. This year alone, 3.5 million children are expected to suffer from malnutrition. Every 10 seconds, another child is affected. Even the mothers tasked with nourishing the next generation are themselves malnourished. The Associated Press reports that current and former USAID officials and partners say around $560 million in humanitarian aid to Afghanistan has been cut. The funding loss has impacted vital services, including emergency food aid, care for severely malnourished infants, essential medical treatment, clean drinking water, and urgent mental health support for survivors of physical violence. While the de facto Afghan authorities have yet to comment on the recent cuts, this comes at a time when the need on the ground are growing and the world's most vulnerable face an increasingly uncertain future. This is Tamim Bahis in Kabul for A News.
You are watching A News. Stay tuned for more, and have a wonderful day.